Welcome back to another episode of TMAT Talks. We are here to continue our discussion of the top 50 Slayers that became more than that because, of course, there's lots of models. We're looking at the forces of good. I'm Rythbryt. I'm joined by Centaur, as always.
Ahoy.
And Tiberius is here, too.
Hello, hello.
All right. So we're going to dive right into our top 50-ish models for the forces of good. These are the Slayers, just the Slayers, the ability to kill things. We've been looking at different rubrics, survivability and killing power, killing heroes, killing troops, your mobility, all that good stuff. We have written about that a lot on the blog. We talked about that some when we did our category deep dives in the last pod. So if you're curious about that, go and check that out. But we're going to dive into our top Slayers for the forces of good, starting with our honorable mentions. So I'm going to read off the rankings for the models in sort of descending order. We'll work our way down. We ended up with 64-ish models that ended up getting at least 150 or better vote from us. So we got a tie at the very, very end of the honorable mentions. In 64th place, 2 models. We've got Arrestor tying with the High Elf Captain. Those were number 50 choices from Centaur and Tiberius. Saruman the White comes in at 63. Young Dwalin the Dwarf comes in at 62. That's from the Army of Thror. The Iron Hills Chariot, just the generic chariot, comes in at 61. Captains of Dol Amroth at 60. The Bolt Thrower Siege Veteran from Minas Tirith at 59. Galadriel Lady of Light at 58 from the White Council list. Young Thorin Oakenshield, also from the Army of Thor, at 57. In 56th, we have the King of the Dead, just narrowly edging him out on a tiebreaker. No, not a tiebreaker. Is Urkin Brand from Rohan. At 54, we have Balin, King of Moria from the Khazad-dûm. Well, I guess Moria expedition list.
Kingdom of Moria.
Kingdom of Moria, yes. 53 is Diorwine from Rohan. 52 is Beorn in his man form, not his bear form. He may or may not show up later in bear form. And at 51, we cap this off our honorable mentions with another tie. Keely and Feely, the champions of Erebor. These are the ones on the goats from Erebor Reclaimed. So these are models that are good Slayers, some of them pretty good Slayers, but for whatever reason did not make, and for these models, the issue is that they did not make it. Most of them are only on one of our lists. They only made one of the top 50. There are a couple of models that made a couple of the lists, but pretty low. So these guys are left, good as so many Slayers. There's only 50 of them that we're choosing to reward. These guys got votes, but they did not, for various reasons, make the full list. Of these models that are honorable mentions, anybody want to make the case for models that you're sort of either surprised? I guess at this point, it's probably are surprised that they are not higher on the list.
Yeah, so I'll lead off. I ranked the King of the Dead near the middle of the pack, and there's obviously a lot of things that factor into this. First of all, for the cost,
we're not worried about spoiling anything, so you can go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I had him at 29 on the list is where I had him. So slightly below the midway point, but still within that middle bracket. And I am a little surprised that he didn't appear on anybody else's list. He's obviously, since he's winning against courage value, it's maybe he has an easy time wounding, maybe he doesn't. But even against a really high courage model, he's rarely having to wound on worse than a 5, right? So, at least as I was looking at it, that definitely helped him an awful lot toward his fighting capability. The fact that if there's a herald nearby, he can call more strikes than just that one might point would have you believe. The fact that you can get heroic combats is also really nice. Like there's a lot that he has going for him. And I feel like asymmetrically, he survives for a really long time. against an enemy and has a lot of chances to slip just a single wound past, and then you've got yourself a kill. So it is a little surprising to me that he didn't get any other votes.
Yeah. Let me opine as well. So I played with him a fair bit recently because I'm kicking around various army lists trying to figure out what I'm going to do for TMAT's tournament that's coming up, the grand tournament in the spring. Because he's strength 4 and because he's got Harbinger of Evil, most of the time it's very unusual that you're going to need more than a 5 to wound, because even really high courage usually tops out at courage 7. Harbinger kicks that down to 6. There are a couple of corner cases, but like they're really, really rare that you're talking about like Galadriel with a warhorn in the army, kind of, or Gandalf with a warhorn in the army, since he doesn't benefit from the Minister's army bonus. So that's really good. I mean, for me, this is going to be we've already sort of talked about it in our lead up pod. He's not mounted, and by himself, he's only got the 1 might point. Having heralds and a pure done herald force will help you with that, because of course you can strike more if you've got the will from the heralds. You do heroic combats and stuff like that. But for me, it's also sort of colored by my play experience with him, because he's only got the 2 attacks. He botches fights for me all the time, and it's really hard to kill stuff if you're botching fights. But he did one-shot Aomer the other day, because Aomer was out of fate, and that drain soul when you only have 5 or better to wound is really good. He does not like being run over by cavalry models, and unless you really want double, like you want him rolling 4 dice to wound, and it's sort of hard to get him to do that, because the dead are you're not likely to get traps until the end of the game, at which point it's kind of coup de grace. So that was a persistent theme for me. What to do with these fight 5 and sometimes even fight 6 to attack heroes on foot, and he ended up falling out sort of for that reason for me.
The King of the Dead. I actually just looked back. I mentioned in the blog that I did that I looked at 175 profiles for this, and he was 55, which so he just didn't make the cusp. There are going to be some heroes, like some guys that are down here, and probably who we'll talk about next, who, I mean, they can't strike, but, with the King of the Dead, you can strike if you have heralds nearby, but otherwise you're probably not striking. You need your might point to boost. And if you're mounted, even if you win fewer fights than the King of the Dead does against big stuff, you're probably knocking most things over, because a lot of foes that you face are going to be infantry. And if they're cavalry, then you're no more at a disadvantage, certainly, against them than fighting with others. But, I mentioned this before. Fight 5, strength 5 did pretty well in my evaluation. If you have 3 or more dice, you do pretty well. And the King of the Dead's fight 5, he might as well be strength 5. But he doesn't have the 3 or more dice. He doesn't knock stuff down. So you really have to work on the traps. My experience with the King of the Dead has been very much like you run into enemy troops, not even heroes, and you hit a wall because you just don't roll enough dice to really do what you want to do. So I didn't have a problem with him not being on my list. I was kind of sad he didn't make it because he has a fun model, but I don't think he's better than a lot of the models that are here on the list.
So just to sort of spoil, just to remind everybody, so our 51 model, the models that didn't make the top 50 are defense 8, fight 5, dwarves with strike on war goats. So the 50,
and 3 might points.
These are really good models. So there's shame and no shame, I suppose, in not making the top 50. It was really hard. Tiberius, you have anybody you want to flag that you're surprised with?
Yeah, so I'm gonna flag two of them at the same time, because they ranked about the same for me. So we had Urkin Brand at 55 and Daer Wine at 53, and both of these, of course, are named Rohan heroes. Urkin Brand is in one Legendary Legion. Daer Wine is in quite a few. And both of them are kind of the same kind of hero. You've got these fight 5, 2 attack captains who get that third dice on the charge, and in certain legions, they're strength 5. I think I can't remember if the Paths of the Druidin keeps the strength +1 on the charge or not. I don't think it does.
No.
But if you're running Daerwine in the Riders of Theoden, or you're running Urkenbrand in the Riders of Aomer, and Urkenbrand happens to be within 12 inches of Aomer, they're both strength 5, fight 5 models with 3 attacks. And they have also got 3 might points. And while Daerwine can use his to call strikes, he's probably calling free heroic combats. And Urkenbrand cannot call a strike. So you assume that they're kind of at fight 5 the entire time. The great thing about these heroes, though, is that they're very good budget fight 5, strength 5 mounted heroes. And Daerwine's, of course, got the bodyguard. Urkenbrand gives you the +2 courage, so they're reliable even against terror foes. They're just really good heroes. And for me, they ranked 27 for Daerwine and 29th for Urkenbrand, which was surprising to me. Because, when you evaluate them against a hero who can strike, they're going to have the lower fight value, but they're going to roll as many dice, right? And so if your opponent doesn't roll well, then you're going to beat him. And when that happens, you're going to knock him over. And with the strength 5, and you wound really good heroes on 5s, you're going to eat. You're going to make him eat some dirt there, and take wounds off. And if they're not careful, you'll plow right over captain level heroes. So I think they're really good, especially for Rohan, who lives on their budget mid-tier heroes. I think they're really good heroes to include.
Yeah, they're good models. I was surprised. I mean, I'm not surprised that they're here. This is about where I have them, in the mid to late 50s, 60s. Daerwine, I went back and forth on. He is good. If you just look at his stat profile, he's probably in the same. He's not quite where Faramir and Durinhelm are, but he's like a notch below. As you've got the fight 5, the strike, the 2 attacks, 3 on the charge, defense 7, which is pretty good. Just the 2 wounds and the 1 fate, but there's a ton of heroes in that category. So and the free heroic combat is a good thing for his killing power. Like he's pretty good at mowing troops down, especially if you're fighting an army that's fight 4 or less, especially if he's got that charge. The model I want to flag, I'm not super angry. There are some I'm not angry about any of this. There are some models where I'm going to be a little shocked to miffed where they ended up. Galadriel, Lady of Light, I have on the list. She was a mid-30s hero for me. I just want to flag this profile because I feel like, the models we've been talking about are 2 attack, fight 5 models. She's a fight 6, 3 attack model with no penalties. She's got the terror. She's got some spells. She's got the banishment spell for additional damage. I know not everybody looked at spells for damage dealing, but I did. The downside, I suppose, for her is that she can't lead any troops. If you live in the UK scene, that's not a downside because she's in a ton of lists anyway. So she's a great model, very dangerous. She's a pretty good slayer. She is, however, still only on foot. And so, again, like we've been sort of talking about with some of these other models, that's a recurring theme as we go along. But I want to give a shout out to her. I thought she should be higher than she is, but I'm not entirely surprised that she's, she just made one of our lists.
So, I mean, obviously, Galadriel is great on the offensive side of things. One of the things that I looked at when putting together my list was resilience. So you'll find that models who tend to have higher defense, who tend to have more fate points, who tend to have more wounds, tend to do better on my list than others. And Galadriel is fantastic with those 3 rerollable fate points and those 3 wounds, but defense 3 is not good. And I distinctly recall that there's a heavy armor version of Galadriel running around at some point. There's a model out there. It looks pretty cool.
I just got
Um,
it. It's beautiful.
yeah,
It's a
it's a
really nice model.
fantastic model. But my understanding is that there's no way to put armor on Galadriel anymore.
Oh no.
Is
Oh no.
at least
So
my
so
understanding.
so the reason that she has the armor is because when she appears to Frodo in the Fellowship of the Ring, she's wearing a breastplate. And when they made the model, they're like, well, that's what she looks like. So bam, we give it to her. And then of course when the Hobbit movies came out, which is where that Galadriel Lady of Light profile now comes from, well, she ain't wearing armor. So when they made the profile for it, and of course the new model, which is no longer available, they're like, she doesn't have armor. Now, I had her like the King of the Dead. She just barely didn't make the cusp. She got a very good toughness rating for me. And the reason for it is because her fight 6 with strike means that she's going to win like at a decent roll and probably a better fight value a good bit of the time. The problem is she's not going to kill things. But on the defensive side, winning a lot means you're not dying, right? And so when you do take damage, right? I mean, from someone like Shagrat or something like that, those 3 rerollable fate points are going to help you ignore one good attack from him. And, I mean, if you're bringing Galadriel, Lady of Light, into an alliance where she doesn't have to be the big hitting hero, if someone's big hero blunts for one turn against her, chances are your big hero is running over something else or is coming over to help. So even if she, can last for a turn or 2 before she starts taking actual wounds, maybe you're fine, I mean, and you can pair her even within the White Council with heroes like Glorfindel and Celeborn and stuff, who are good heroes, good killing heroes in their own right. And Galadriel's defense is enough to buy time for those heroes to go and do whatever you need them to do to win. So I actually don't think toughness is that big of a critique for her. We're ignoring the fact that she's pretty resilient against both archery and magic, both of which are key ways to take down most of the big heroes we're going to talk about tonight. And she's a pretty decent resilience against both, not just for herself, but for also the people around her. So in defense of Galadriel, toughness. Where she really suffered for mine is she doesn't knock stuff over when she wins, and she's not fast, and she's kind of pricey, right? I mean, for a hero who doesn't kill a lot, right? So,
Yeah. I think it's worth noting as well, and I'm glad you brought up the point about the archery and everything else. So you primarily bring her in your army for other stuff. You bring her to deal with a shade or a Barrow-wight. You bring her to, get blinding light up without having to cast blinding light, and channel it without having to channel it, and have a little terror bubble if you need a terror bubble for some reason. Unusual. There's a harbinger bubble. Unusual to have good models that cause terror, but the ones that do tend to be elves. And if you're running other elven heroes, like a terror bubble next to a harbinger bubble, little 6-inch harbinger bubble next to Elrond is great. He's not going to be charged, all that stuff. But on top of all that other stuff where you primarily take her, she is actually pretty good at killing things, unlike most wizards. So kind of like the Witch King with the crown, she can flex to that secondary combat model if you need to, in a way that her other profile or Gandalf the Grey or Saruman have more trouble flexing to. If you need them in a fight, they can fight. Galadriel is pretty good in a fight. And at fight 6, and she can strike with this profile as well. She's not an easy out for the toughness, for the combat reasons, while being annoying. So, anyways, she made my list, but, just an honorable mention for all of us.